I also hope that we can move away from this very gendered and loaded idea of assertiveness and understand it for what it really is, which is just being direct, being clear, being fair, considering the competing interests that might be in a meeting or a conversation, and engaging equitably with one another.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Perpetual Motion, a podcast focused on wellness, personal growth, culture, and relationships, positive relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Mo Anderson, bestselling author, award-winning podcast host, keynote speaker, and speaker coach. Sometimes I interview expert guests like today, and sometimes I do a solo show, but my goal is always the same. I want to help you, yes, you, review, renew, and re-you. At the end of each show, I hope you have learned something that will elevate you to the next level of success. If you're new to the show or a returning visitor, let's make this official. Click that subscribe button to be notified of new episodes as soon as they are available. Also, help us grow and reach more listeners by rating the show and leaving a comment. Just type a little bit, just a little something. All right? Stay tuned because today my special guest is Cara Tuttle Bell. She is a powerful speaker on sexual harassment and assault prevention. Boy, do we need some powerful speakers on that. And she also is an expert on why assertiveness is a crucial component of communication, personal safety, and overall well-being. She's got a great book. She's the author of Drowning in Timidity, Women, Politeness, and the Power of Assertive Living. I'll be right back with Cara Tuttle Bell.
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid? I'd rather live like I'm dying than live to die. Any day, my heart is pure, my soul is safe.
Cara, welcome to Perpetual Motion.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
This is exciting. I haven't had a guest with your background or for this particular topic. I mean, assertiveness as part of communication is not something that we really think about. In fact, women get criticized for that a lot when they can, just be the same way as a guy. But, and also sexual harassment is just, I don't know if it's on the rise or we're talking about it more, but these are such important topics. And I'm glad you're here to help us understand better. Let's start with assertiveness. Why do we need to be more assertive?
I really hope that we can reclaim assertiveness. I think there are so many reasons that we need to show up and assert ourselves, both for ourselves and for others. I also hope that we can move away from this very gendered and loaded idea of assertiveness and understand it for what it really is, which is just being direct, being clear, being fair, considering the competing interests that might be in a meeting or a conversation, and engaging equitably with one another.
And I hope we can as well. And I don't know the history behind it, but I just, think about women who run for office or women who are in positions of authority. And it seems like they're just held to a whole nother standard when it comes to confidence and communication. What do you know the origin of that? Is it just the role of women evolving, or what the heck?
I mean, I think we are in the midst of it. I think we are watching this play out. Unfortunately, there are still too few women in these historically male-dominated spaces. Mm-hmm. So they remain judged and evaluated by old-fashioned norms about male behavior and what we thought male leadership is and male courage looks like, and really white male visions of that in most industries, but especially politics, as you mentioned. I mean, I think it is very, very hard for them to walk this tightrope or strike the right balance. And get evaluated in the same way. I mean, they're just not. We hear it on the news. We see it in the comment section of websites. You see it in headline after headline. You see it on Twitter, where women are being judged more harshly for engaging directly, for having stances and opinions, which of course they do. And we should welcome that, because I think a lot of people are confusing assertiveness and aggression.
Yes. And that's what we're getting to. And as you said that, what came to mind is even the subtle ways that this plays out. Even when I hear, I'm a speaker, you're a speaker, but I'll hear other speakers so often when they quote someone famous, it's always what Patton said, what Lincoln said, what Reagan said. I hear women at events for women speakers at events for women, and they don't have one single quote or statistic or anything from another female, or for that matter, from even someone of another culture. I'll go out of my way to try to find something from someone in India or Canada or Australia. And it's so ingrained that I think some people don't even recognize that they're doing it. But for a woman speaker to give an hour speech and never quote a woman, that just blows my mind.
It does mine too. I mean, I completely agree. And I hope others can work intentionally to really diversify their message and their program and their slides and their images. I mean, you have to do the work. Yes. And a lot of it is internalized. So I know that we're all busy, and these women speakers are probably like, I've got this presentation tomorrow, and they may be finalizing their slides, but it's worth doing, right? It's worth doing because so many people are watching and listening. Now, granted, we are trying to make up for these huge gaps in education, right? Especially like in public education in the US. Mm-hmm. You probably were taught about a lot of men, a lot of military generals, Mm-hmm. We see a lot of quotes from men's sports coaches as well. It's like they're always a go-to. These things are much more present in our mind because we're surrounded by those messages. We get them from day one. I mean, everywhere you go in a restaurant, men's sports is often on. Church, male leaders. So it's like, mm-hmm. We've been surrounded by male leadership in a lot of different spaces for the bulk of our lives. And, we've made so much progress, but we're still working to get towards equity. We haven't landed there yet. So we got to do some of this work of undoing to really be better at inclusion, right? So it's like diversity and inclusion and belonging, which means we got to correct for the past. We got to address those lingering effects of that kind of socialization. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I do think asserting ourselves in these spaces, whether it's work, our professional relationships, our community works, our churches, is part of that work, is part of the action that we can take.
Right. Very, very good. Good points. And back to what you said earlier, which leads to my next question. What is the difference between being assertive and aggressive? Because I think a lot of people confuse the two.
Yeah, I agree. I think we see both, and it can be gendered. I mean, we have lots of good studies on this. We are just judging women more harshly. Mm-hmm. But when you look at these things foundationally, like, what does this mean? What is the definition of these words? Then, aggression is that steamrolling, is that coming at something with force. It could be an abuse of power. It can be physical. It can be verbal. Mm-hmm. It can be using or depriving someone of resources. It's that misuse and abuse that becomes aggression, right? It can be violent. It can be the unhealthy expression of anger. I'm actually fine with anger. It'll probably come up in some other answers, but we don't want too much
constructive anger. Or destructive.
It depends, right? It depends how you use it. I don't want us to live in it so much that we're bitter, but I want to harness anger as fuel so that we have that extra boost of energy to assert ourselves. Asserting yourself means you're showing up, you're being present, you're participating, and that varies. You're participating appropriate to your role in the workplace. You're participating on a committee that you're assigned to. You should be doing the work you're being asked to do,
right.
And doing it fairly. So there's nothing wrong when I go to a meeting with asserting my own ideas, the agenda, of my office and what I'm responsible for, and having that open conversation about whatever the decision is, right? And how we should make it.
Advocate for ourselves. Yeah.
Yes, and what we should consider. And then it just sits there. It doesn't mean the other person has that obligation to receive it, but I'm showing up and engaging directly and fairly and equitably. So that to me is assertive and assertive communication, which differs from, really, if you think of like an 80s Wall Street type of movie, that American, like, I'm going to claw my way to the top, dog eat dog approach. That's really the misuse of that. That's taking it too far. That's aggressive, and it's inequitable.
Right. You made me think about, I'm glad you said that anger is okay sometimes, because I'm here in the South and we still have a lot of Southern Belle mentality, and even when you are slicing and dicing somebody, you need to be smiling and offering them tea as they die. It's just there's so many
pleasant at all times.
So many things. I had a couple of folks that I was mentoring at a previous company, and they came here from the East Coast, and they were just having such problems with clients because they were just, going in, just being normal, really being normal, but not the Southern way. And I was like, hey, you're going to have to, and this wasn't male or female, but they were female. So they were getting it double, like, people aren't responding. I was like, you got to go in this way. You got to come in real low and smooth. You got to ask about their children. We cannot just sit down and start talking about business. We got to drink and eat a little bit. It's just, there's so many cultural things in addition. And then you throw these gender stereotypes and biases on top of it. Oh my God, it makes me weary sometimes.
It can be exhausting. And this is why I always talk about politeness, because when I'm talking about assertiveness or assertiveness training, a lot of women, and you're right about the South, right? It's a different audience. Sometimes a lot of Southern women in particular are a little resistant. Part of them wants to embrace assertiveness, and then they're like, but, it feels too confrontational. It feels unladylike. I hear these things from them, and I'm like, okay.
And that word exactly, I know you hear.
Yes.
Unladylike.
Unladylike.
That is such a Southern word.
It is. It's like, why wouldn't we just be pleasant and don't want to create conflict? We like to smooth things out. I'm currently in the South, and we just have to talk through it, right? And so I'm like, listen, I'm all for polite behavior, but I'm really for kindness, right? We should be kind to other humans and patient and all of those things, but not to a fault, not when it keeps us engaging, not when it keeps us from addressing injustice, not when it means that we're always minding our business while harm after harm and types of discrimination keep occurring, not when it keeps us from having healthy relationships. So this people pleasing or fear of any sort of discomfort or conflict is the root of so many problems, personal and structural, societal. So I really am always advocating for us to bring assertiveness well beyond your salary negotiation conversation. That's when I think people think, okay, I can visit it for 5 minutes. I can be assertive for this moment in my life that comes maybe every 3 to 5 years. And I'm just going to cram for it too. They just think, all right, give me a script. I'm going to cram for this the night before. And listen, I'll help you with salary negotiation. I will. Okay. So you can come to me for the last minute cramming session, but that's not skill building, right? That's like faking it till you make it. That's like, I hope you can be assertive and hold for 2 minutes the next day when you have the conversation, but probably not, because you're not practicing this on a daily basis. And it feels too hard when we make it infrequent and high stakes. And so this is about something that really I think people should embrace as daily practice. It's self-care. It's setting boundaries. It's maintaining those boundaries. It helps us have healthy relationships, and it helps us also be really in touch with those times when people are trying to violate our boundaries, where I want you to that's where I'm fine with anger. I want you to be in touch with that feeling when it comes up for you, so you know what it means. But then harness it, for maximum impact. And so that's where like the anger's fine. The anger's probably valid. I mean, there's so many valid reasons to be outraged.
Yes.
Right now. There's so many. But what are we going to do with that? Right? Because I don't want people to live in bitterness and resentment. That's the same outcome of not engaging assertively. Like that's what happens when people are passive or passive aggressive, is that they're holding on to it. So for me, assertiveness is this balance that helps us be healthy on a daily basis and fair.
I like that you make that point about, clients trying to come to you for the last minute. They come to me with their speeches at the last minute. I'm like, delivering communication is a lifestyle. It's a way of life. It's kind of hard to get to that, keynote level in a night. And I would think with salary negotiating too, what I think I've seen with people who try that cramming type of thing is that they overcorrect. And all of a sudden, they're like, and this is what and you're like, wait a minute, what is going on? So I can't even hear what you're saying because I don't know you. Who are you anyway?
No, it is a burst. It is, because it's really like they are really trying to summon up the courage. And so it does come up too quickly, too strong. And then I also see people who just can't hold their position. So even if they can say the 2 sentences that they've memorized to make the ask, they then undo it with that need for pleasantry.
Right. If that's okay with you.
Exactly.
If you don't mind. Exactly. And I'm sorry. And if you think it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yes. I want this. We gotta fix this quickly because I got a granddaughter and I want something different for her. Absolutely. Yes. I want all of the young women. Just there's so much going on, as you said, and we're not gonna get into that, but this is a clear and pressing issue. Let's go to, being assertive, and I'm just guessing, you're the expert on this. Sexual harassment is a problem, is something you have some expertise in, and it's a lingering problem. And I think I'm wondering if being timid as well, if that in no way am I ever trying to make a woman at fault about anything, but if assertiveness, when you talk about your safety and well-being, if that can, in some ways help you with that. But let's just talk about, let's start with why in 2022 is sexual harassment still, Jeffrey Epstein, a problem?
It is, and people ask me this a lot. This is my day job, right? This is the kind of compliance job that I have. So I'm trained as a lawyer and I work on a college campus. And so I'm addressing sexual harassment and assault all day, every day, and have for the past, 8+ years. Wow. And I am very passionate about it. I've become very assertive. And that's like both the personal and professional journey. I used to be shy. Law school really helps, but you also can practice, right? A lot of it had to be a willingness to do the practice. So I wasn't born this way, for your listeners. Like, definitely this can be learned. I know it can be because, I'm sitting here as the proof. And the outrage that I have over the issue helps, right? I mean, the outrage helps. The anger helps. I try to turn it into fuel to push me through the day, to be able to then bring it, in a meeting or whatever it is that I'm working on addressing. And I think that what we think in the field is that we're not seeing like a new epidemic. We're just seeing increased awareness, increased reporting of what has for a very long time been very, very high levels of this type of discrimination and harm. And it is everywhere you look. It is more common in male-dominated professions, and you can look through data on this. This is business data. This is insurance policy data. The more there is a disparity in a profession, the more men outnumber women, the more incidents we have. And it's been this way for a long time. The more vulnerable a person in a role is, and that can be geographic isolation, that can be low pay, that can be low influence or authority in the position. That can be the seasonal nature of a position. Whatever it is that isn't giving them security in a position in relation to other people makes them more likely to experience this type of harm. So it remains prevalent because inequity is prevalent, and it's connected to the other forms of discrimination. So where you have racism and ableism and transphobia and homophobia and other types of discrimination, you're going to also have gender harassment, sexism, misogyny, sexual harassment, and sexual assault. Now, where assertiveness comes in is that the current best practice that we're trying to implement really across the board, K through 12 schools, it's been in the military, they're introducing it in churches. I think we're going to see this more and more across corporate America, definitely has taken hold in higher ed, is by teaching what's called bystander intervention training. Mm-hmm. And that's because we're all bystanders, like it or not. I mean, we're just here navigating the world, and you choose, and it is a choice, whether to be an active or a passive bystander. Now, a lot of us were raised to mind our own business. A lot of us worry about the risks of speaking up or of standing out sometimes.
Well, and that boys will be boys thing.
And then the tolerance.
I had some incidents, and it was just blown off. Like, that's just part of it. Just,
Yes.
Don't wear short skirts and go out after dark kind of thing. Like, it's my fault.
Right. We still hear a lot of blaming for the target, like they're responsible for receiving the harassment. And so where I am glad and can promise that there's been progress is a lot of the prevention messages are not so sexist anymore. I mean, they were just sexist in application. They were saying women do this to prevent your own assault. Mm-hmm. And we weren't having, when I was in college, corresponding messaging given to the male students who all of the data suggests, are much more likely to be engaging in perpetration, regardless of the gender identity of the victim. Mm-hmm. So men are, from all the data we have, and that's across fields. So it's, criminal justice data, psychology, sociology, women's studies, that's not actually in dispute. So we haven't realistically confronted the problem for some time, but the public health model now is recommending that we teach a lot of bystander intervention, and we are. So it is now routine practice at colleges and universities in the United States, more and more often showing up. Yes,
that's good to know.
Since 2014. So they're supposed to be doing it. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. But we're doing it, and it's teaching you some strategies. If you see something, say something, but it's also giving you choices. So not everyone has to swoop in like a superhero or be loud or address something directly. They can also create a distraction. You can delegate to someone who's better able or who has authority to try to respond when appropriate. We need to think broadly about delegation. So it's not necessarily always law enforcement that we're calling. It's what's appropriate for the situation, right? So sometimes it's me, like on campus, people can call me because it's my job to go do these things. And so if someone feels like they don't know what to say or they don't know what to do, who can you take with you? Who can you delegate to? How can you document something? Documentation, we're seeing having really transformative and activist power in recent years, helping us really confront some harsh realities and prove to the doubters some things that a lot of us knew were happening. So sometimes documentation from afar is the thing we can do safely to address an issue. And that takes some nerve too, right? So all of these things we're hoping to equip people to choose from if they are in the midst of situations at risk for sexual harassment or assault, but it can apply to all forms of discrimination.
What bothers me with the documentation is in the form of a video, if that falls into that category, is when people are just filming just for the purpose of posting and entertaining and not to get help. That is just appalling, filming women being raped, assaulted, beat up, and men too, to be clear. This can not just happen to women assault and harassment, although, as you said, the data shows that it's for adults predominantly going to be women, but are they teaching them that documentation needs to go somewhere and not just post it and hope somebody sees it? Because that's scary to me.
It is scary. So I'm always making that qualifier. We know this, like college students consume a lot of video content from, some popular sites. And so just quite directly, I'm like, this is not for that. That is not what we're asking you to do. Consent is really key when we're talking about sexual misconduct. Like consent is key. So if you're filming something without someone's consent and you're posting it somewhere without their consent and you're sharing it without consent, you are part of the problem. That's also increasingly illegal, right? So like they shouldn't be sharing sexual content. So yes, I think that is a very important part of the conversation that cannot be left out. I don't care how long the training's running. It's like, if you're going to mention documentation, you've got to put those really important caveats around it.
Because that's what came to mind. And even I believe it's illegal almost everywhere now to post pics, the revenge posting of some intimate photo or whatever that was sent to you. And I'm happy that, law enforcement and our lawmakers are stepping up. But again, we're looking at largely male populations to make these decisions. So us speaking up and getting involved, and folks like you being there to help make this transition is so important. And I was thinking about as well, too, to go back to harassment being a lingering problem. We're talking about learned behavior as in, confidence and being assertiveness. Isn't this sexual harassment learned behavior? I can't imagine. I mean, I have two sons. They didn't come here like that. And then heaven forbid that's going on. But from the movies to their peers to whatever, is a course enough? Or do we have to attack all of these industries, magazines and music and everything? Not attack, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I do know what you mean. It is very concerning, right? Because young people are always getting so many different messages and contradictory messages, right? And so even if they're raised one way, they could then land in a peer environment where they're getting reinforcement on a lot of negative behaviors. And this is true across the board. This could be drug use. This could be alcohol misuse. This could be for like how they engage in sexual practices. Do they bully and harass people? So that peer dynamic pushes some young people into behaviors they otherwise normally wouldn't engage in on their own. And they tell us that, right? I mean, there's really fascinating research on these topics, and getting them to display some moral courage, some assertiveness, that's really tough. That is really tough. So we got to really pull it apart. We work through scenarios. We talk to a lot of them about what leadership is, because many of them want to be a leader in some capacity, and they want to skip over the work, right? They want to just graduate and be like a, successful millionaire entrepreneur in their 20s. And we're talking about like, well, what skills, aren't you practicing and developing, particularly these students who've been in the home environment, so they didn't have the social experience of the past few years due to COVID. On college campuses, we are seeing a developmental delay. I mean, we are. Like, it is not the same incoming class, that we had pre-pandemic in the interpersonal communication skills. So it really did feel like we had these young students kind of just unleashed, once some of the restrictions were lifted, and they were coming to us with different questions. I don't like my roommate. I don't know how to navigate this conflict, whether it's conflict over laundry or deciding where to eat in a group. So they're just asking us really basic social questions and for tips that they thought they were past at least a few years ago. Now, I always thought they had room for improvement, but it wasn't at such a basic level. So I'm very concerned about their ability to engage in sexual communication and ensure that consent is a part of those things, or know and honor resistance and discomfort when they're seeing it. I mean, people are not really teaching them this consistently. So we don't have consistent sex ed in this country. It really depends where they are. A lot of schools are afraid, and that's because of the parents complain about the type of content. So I very rarely see a college student who has what I would want them to have had before they get to college, which would be medically accurate information about their body, the bodies of others, consent education, boundaries, warning signs of unhealthy relationships, what constitutes dating violence or exploitation, sexual exploitation, a lot of which that like coercion and blackmailing can occur with phones, pictures, and videos now, because otherwise they get here and people in jobs like mine, we will try to do what we can, but a lot of times they're 18 when they get here, right? And so we've got to engage in some unlearning to try to then relearn or teach them new skills. And no, they're not getting enough time with me. They're with their peers most of all. Right. And dosage is key. So we
micro dosages of emotional intelligence and boundaries.
We got to challenge. We got to talk about what they're learning, right? And why they're with the availability of online pornography. Are they learning more from porn because they're not getting sex ed in schools? That is concerning to me. So then it's not surprising when they're reenacting things they saw online and they tell us stuff like, oh, I think they like that. And I'm like, well, you can't assume everybody likes that. Where did you get this idea?
That woman or that man is paid to do that.
Right, which changes the dynamic, right? Like it's all about consent. So we have to help them unpack these things a little bit and work through it. And, you touched on this earlier, and this is really important to say, is some assertiveness does deter some bad behavior. Not all, okay? There's always going to be people who are trying to violate our boundaries and trying to cause harm, who are trying to take advantage of a situation. So we can't prevent everything.
Exactly.
But there is research to support that strong articulation of boundaries, clear resistance does disrupt and deter some behavior. It may not prevent them from harming someone else, which I understand. They might then just choose another target. But it is worth a try when we think we're in a situation to nip something in the bud early on, right? And especially if we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, right? Because if the behavior continues and you get to a place where you're going to want to report it or seek some support, they're going to ask if you were clear about your boundaries. They're going to ask the question, did you tell them this made you uncomfortable? And no, you shouldn't have to. They should just not commit the harm. I agree with you completely. None of this should be happening. But it is happening, and it's happening often. So I do want to just give people as many tools as possible to be able to reduce harm, appease when that's the best choice for safety, or extricate yourself from a situation.
Kara, what about this? I'm thinking about the gymnasts, Simone Biles and others. I mean, they did everything. They reported it. They went to the authorities. I think they went to the FBI. Oh my goodness. That it honestly makes me think about discrimination with African Americans back with the Tulsa race riots and everything. Who do you turn to when the people coming for you are the people who are supposed to protect you, or the people who are ignoring it are the authorities? It
is true, and it is so discouraging. Okay, not every human resources department or law enforcement department, these people who are supposed to be who you can turn to, clearly that's not consistently available or going to guarantee success. I mean, very few times can I offer the people I'm working with anything that feels like justice. And that's really disappointing, right? Because a lot of us are raised to have faith in these systems and these procedures. We build trust. Like, that you hope that your company cares about you, especially if you've worked there for 20 years.
Right.
We give so many messages about how we care about all these issues. Yet when people
values and missions.
Yes, the statements are lovely, but you got to back that up with action. And I know that sometimes the supportive person is hard to find, but I do know, because this is my professional network, right? These are the conferences I go to. There are hundreds or thousands of us who do care, and they may not be at your company. Okay. They may not be. And a good indication is look up your sexual misconduct policy. Is it from 1992? Has anyone updated it since?
I mean, how would you know? Because they'll change the bottom of the document. They'll change the footer or the front page to say it's updated. Yes. But you just mean, like when you look at it, can you tell from the content that this is not current with, our culture and our beliefs now?
Yes, right. Because a wave of activism on this was in the early to mid 90s, really, really prompted by Anita Hill's testimony during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing. So that was the wake up call for America, phase one. And sadly, a lot of the work stopped then. So my college students, when they go get their next job, the ones who maintained contact with us, or who took my class, they do things like look up the policy and when was the last time the committee met and what would I do if I experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. And some of them are pretty activist and they ask these questions at the interview. That is risky. You may not get the job offer if you're showing yourself to be what might be perceived as a troublemaker at the interview, right? If you care too much about some of these causes, that could make the employer nervous.
But it would be better to know then and not in that.
No, I agree.
That HR might be the very person you have to go to.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, you and I are on the same page. I'm like, there is another job. I promise you there's another job. Sometimes the students are so worried, but I'm like, you need to be interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. These are signs. They are telling you whether or not this is going to be a healthy or a toxic workplace culture, whether or not they're going to cover for people or actually address the things that are happening. But if you can't find it at your school or in your church or at your place of employment, do some internet research because there are many nonprofit organizations regionally, nationally. I mean, I'd help anyone find them. There are attorneys who take things pro bono. There are all sorts of resources now to help people across industries. It is sometimes hard to find them, but I know that they're there. I know that they're there because those of us who've experienced these things and have had help now want to extend that help to others because the support is not consistently available.
No, it's not. But there are so many who have, myself included, been victims of sexual harassment. And I think in addition to Anita Hill, I feel like Tarana Burke's Me Too movement, even though it's come under a lot of criticism. And yes, there have been people accused for everything who may have been innocent, even Child Protective Services. There's always going to be that small percentage. But Kara, I was after that happened with, and people don't realize she had been talking about that for a while and had that hashtag Me Too for some years before it got retweeted following the Harvey Weinstein thing, Weinstein. And I remember being with some girlfriends. We'd gone to a movie and everybody was talking about hashtag Me Too. And we were afterwards, we were talking and we got to talking about it. And these were professional women. There were about 6 of us. And every single one of us had been a victim of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And none of us were in a position that we felt we could do anything about it and have any support. And that was it took me weeks just to get over that revelation, because you kind of go around just thinking it's just you, like perhaps those young gymnasts were doing, not realizing how many people were being victimized. And I mean, we kind of cried together. And when you don't deal with it, to just the post-traumatic stress of it just being there, and some of that resentment, anger, and explosiveness is in not, that it happened and that you weren't able to deal with it. So in addition to you guys teaching these courses and you being there as an advocate, an attorney, a trained attorney, is there also counseling now? Are there more
Yes.
mental health services?
Yes, we're seeing just a dramatic expansion across higher ed, which is good and overdue, around all kinds of counseling and well-being, right? So we'll see a Center for Student Wellbeing. You'll see expanded staff, and many more culturally relevant and sensitive trainings and staff to serve particular populations. If you look at the hiring, you just see it everywhere, like in many states, that there are just so many jobs, because this is an urgent issue on college campuses, not just sexual assault, but I mean the mental health and well-being concerns. And yes, right. So if someone were to connect with us, we offer them a menu of services. They can work with victim advocates, or they can go to the counseling center, and there's some specialization in sexual trauma, or aspects of identity that they can seek out a provider who they feel comfortable with, who they think gets their experience, but also understands what they're processing. We have yoga, we have meditation, we have study skills, we have, financial education that can be necessary. A lot of places have hardship funds, student health. So our medical providers have a lot more understanding of sexual trauma, childhood sexual abuse, and, because those exams, the exams that you're touching the body, I mean, that can be very triggering for a survivor, and consent is just important, and providing information. So everything that I'm seeing is getting more trauma informed. The progress is just slower than any of us would like. Law enforcement also has been getting, more trauma informed training over the years. A lot of assumptions about doing the work, which led to really a lot of dismissal of some of the reports, because if they interview a sexual assault victim in the immediate aftermath of trauma, she's still in the space of trauma. Trauma disrupts memory encoding, like how our brain is storing them and putting them together. So it would be difficult while we're in fight or flight, we're in the adrenaline surge. These things last for days, not just minutes and hours. And so, they've learned that conducting open-ended interviews after 3 to 5 sleep cycles is actually much more likely to produce a coherent narrative with fewer gaps.
And I know for a long time, they just kind of thought you just get to them right away. They're going to, start making up stuff or imagining stuff, or they'll forget. Yes. But you're saying the memory can actually, that's, and for the person experiencing that's horrible too. But with time, it sounds like it's kind of scattered pieces, and you can start putting it together a little better.
You can, and if alcohol's involved, and it often is, it's not always, but alcohol consumption, whether voluntary or used to commit the crime, that further disrupts that memory consolidation and encoding. And so really sleep and being in a safe environment, and emergency rooms aren't always feeling safe. They're like hectic and loud, and there's people in and out. And so conducting an interview, even with good intentions, even when they want to get the information to try to, try to get the offender as quickly as possible, was not producing good results. So we're seeing new approaches being adopted here and there. I mean, again, it's not everywhere, and I would like it to be, to do things like the forensic experiential trauma interview. That's one, it's called FETI, where it's training them to build rapport, create a really safe condition so it doesn't feel like we're interrogating a victim, ask open-ended questions, let them go where they want to go, right? Because the brain is navigating through fear and trauma. So that's
not linear. Yeah.
And it's not going to be linear. But at the end of the conversation, or several conversations, it should be the job of that investigator to put that story together. So we were really, and often are, making the person who experienced the harm be the crime scene, and then do all of the work of reconstructing the narrative. And that was just not the best way to get at the information. So that's really what we now know about the brain and trauma has really, really changed the approach in ways that better equip any type of investigator who understands this is the neurobiology of trauma, who has this training to ask better questions and get a better narrative. And since what we're talking about is often word against word, that narrative is crucially important. Sometimes there's corroborating evidence, but a lot of times there isn't. And so getting that good account from the person who was harmed is tough work, but it's tough work worth doing.
Right. And not being dismissive. And the big message here, whatever age you are, is that there are people out there who will help you, who can help you. And systematically, it hasn't always been the case. And there's still going to be some of the old attitudes and processes out there, but don't give up. I mean, we're seeing things coming out now about, and I don't want to keep naming organizations, but just, people who were children, male and female, and things happen, and they're just now getting restitution, getting justice, and we don't want to see that anymore.
It takes a long time, and it's very important to acknowledge that these harms and this discrimination occurs across identity, right? So it occurs across gender identity, occurs in all communities, whether you're class level and across race. We do know that there's disproportionate impact, right? That some people have more vulnerable characteristics that let them be targeted, and also that let the justice system then fail them than others. So absolutely, none of this is fair and consistent across the board, but help is available if you know where to look. And if you don't know where to look, reach out to me and I will help you. There are people who will help you find it.
Thank you for that. We're going to give your information too in the show notes and when we get to the end. But before we do, I want to know, we're talking about assertiveness, but how do we, if we're not naturally that way, unbelievably, I'm not a natural extrovert. People have a hard time believing that, but I'm not really, but I had to learn it, and because I was tired of getting run over. But how can we learn? I mean, I just went at it and role model somebody, but what's a better, more systematic, I practiced until it became second nature, but what's a more strategic, or what is the recommended way to learn assertiveness? And I want to couch that in two ways. One is, I've got young people around me. How do I teach them assertiveness in my kind little Southern Bible Belt, way, so that they don't get in trouble at school, but also for people that it's not their nature. And there are a lot of adults, male and females, who they don't want trouble. They just rather not say anything.
I know it's hard to start. Okay. It's hard, and it will feel painful. It will. And I didn't know there were tools around when I was doing it. And so I was like, you have to jump in this conversation. You've got to, and I was making myself do these things. And I was like, it really was faking it until you make it. But now I know that there are lots of books. There are. Now, a lot of them came out in the 70s. That's where we saw the debut of assertiveness training, 70s women movement. And some of them are still really good foundational texts. Now, some of it's going to feel really dated. And just, if you read those, and they're cheap, you can get a lot of these at used bookstores for nothing, for pennies. Just let the dated stuff go and take the lessons where you can find them. Then again, as I mentioned, a resurgence in the 90s. So you might see some of these books available from mid-90s. A lot of them are really focused on women at work, and so they're career focused, and they're about being ambitious. But there's some good lessons in there still. Now, what I like about recent products is that they're much more inclusive also. So it's not so stereotypical about men and women. And these are tools for everyone. And this is really good, because a lot of people come to the assertiveness training workshops, and sometimes they're making assumptions that are just for women, but there are men who feel like they're getting run over in meetings and they don't know how to advocate for themselves either. This really is for everybody. Mm-hmm. So you can Google assertiveness training. There are lots of free resources on the web. There are books, there are workbooks. I do have my book. It has some exercises in it. I've got a workbook only that's available on Etsy, but there's lots of.
You can't say the name of your book.
My book is Drowning in Timidity, Women, Politeness, and the Power of Assertive Living. It is available at my website, karatuttlebell.com, but also for Kindle on Amazon. You can purchase it at Walmart or through Professional Women Books. it lives in a couple different places.
Wonderful.
So it's available. It does have exercises in it. Start with self-reflection, right? You've got to know who you are and what's hard for you so we know what to work on. So quick questions would be, when you are walking across campus, are you the person who always moves out of the way on the sidewalk? Or do you hold your position? On a plane, do you ever get the armrest or do you never get the armrest? In your family or, romantic relationships, do we ever eat where you want to eat? Or is someone else always making the decision? Are you watching the movies you want to watch? Or are you just going along? And so there's all kinds of questions to just do some self-reflection about, where am I and where's it's worth it? I'm not saying fight every battle. I don't know what I'm having for dinner tonight, and I may not care when I go home and make that decision with my partner. It may be their night to pick. But the question is, are you ever getting what you want? Ever? And where is it important for you to do so? We can apply this to romantic and sexual relationships. Who's experiencing pleasure and how often? And why not? And assertiveness matters there too. Like, are we giving more than we're getting? And you just apply that give and take analysis.
Not even Sunday.
Oh, I know. Yes. To whatever relationship we're talking about, right? Like, are you feeling taken advantage of, or does it feel really balanced and equitable? So that you start with the self-reflection, then you start with the small practice. I want you to start small. I want it to feel doable. I want you to ask for something that's really low stakes, so it doesn't matter if you get the yes or not. And I also want you to get comfortable hearing no. You'll survive the no. It's all right. You survived the tough meeting. We survived the uncomfortable phone call. We've survived it over and over. We've survived it all thus far. So you will survive. And that's why that's nice in my career. And I've also learned to perform extroversion, even though I have to retreat and recharge. If you learn, you can do it. I'll learn I can do it. I'm going to have this burst of energy. I've also become really good about setting boundaries so I have that time to recharge. That also requires assertiveness. I got to tell my friends, I cannot go out again. I'm like, try to limit to 2 happy hours or, 2 social events a week. Otherwise, I feel too depleted. And some of us can't say no to our friends who love us anyway. They love me anyway. They know I don't go to brunch. Okay, I don't go to brunch. Brunch is too loud, and I don't understand middle of the day drinking.
And they'll tease you about it. We're inviting you. We know you're not coming, but
yes, and it's fine. Then it's all fine
in other ways. Right?
Yes, I'm like their, they know I'll fight for them. They know I've got their back. So like, your relationships should be strong enough to survive that. Actually, they should be thriving. That's like, they should really be seeing you for who you are and letting you be healthy in the ways that you need. And so starting small with the practice just really helps you learn to ask. If you have kids, I would say make them make phone calls, make them, maybe put the name in at the restaurant. The students are coming in really, really struggling with just verbal communication, like out loud communication, because they're doing it all on their phones. Okay. They want to text or do an online chat, and, we're not preparing them for work. Work still requires some phone calls. It's at some point you have to talk to another human. So you can start small in those ways to make them practice talking and to talking to, adults, and actually like talking across a power differential in appropriate ways. But we got to break the seen and not heard, because seen and not heard is how we have a lot of child victimization. That's how we have the gymnasts, which we talked about, going on for so long. How do you have hundreds of victims for so long? Well, they did everything right, as you said. They told us and they told us and they told us and they told adults and they told the FBI, and how does this still continue? So I actually want us to raise angry girls, like.
There's your next book. That's the next title.
I know. I was like, I've got to write that down.
I'll send it to you. I wrote it down. That's good.
Yes, because the anger is a signal, as we talked about. If you're stressing politeness over their boundaries and well-being, they're not going to acknowledge the harm themselves. They're not going to tell you about it. They're not going to seek support. They're going to be stuck in that self-blame, and so let anger be the signal, let assertiveness be the tool, right? And then the outcome is healthier beings, right? Who, once they've learned to advocate for themselves and assert themselves, absolutely, I want them to have this sense of collective responsibility. And this is part of my message, which I really think was missing in the books of the 70s and in the 90s. Mm-hmm. You got to advocate for others. That's what changes our communities. You've got to be a bystander who engages, or be the witness who goes along and confirms somebody's report, who at least acknowledges the harms that are happening everywhere we look, and engage collectively. So it's not assertiveness just to get you a raise, which you deserve. Okay, get your raise. But that's changing an individual person's existence. That's not creating change in our communities, structural or systemic change. That's not going to bring about gender equity. So we've got to use assertiveness to change our communities and engage collectively as well. And I think that's, been missing in too many places.
Right. And we've been so worried about the cost ourselves individually and not thinking about long-term, the consequences for generations to come, like the inequity with salaries and so many other things. When we think about what the CEOs of the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company, 4% women, all of this is related. It's all related, and it's time we changed it and start by not being bystanders. Get out there and be advocates and leaders in this area. I love what you're doing. I could just go on and on. We need to do a live or something, because I have enjoyed this, and your passion around it is wonderful, and learned a lot. I didn't know what was going on college campuses. I go back for a football game, roll out. So this is, I could have used some of this. Trust and believe. Trust and believe. So, again, Kara Tuttle Bell, author of Drowning in Timidity. Is that you? Drowning in Timidity, Women, Politeness, and the Power of Assertive Living. Tools and tips to help anyone get it wherever books are sold. Tell them how to connect with you online, that website one more time, social media, however we can find you online.
Sure. The easy way is to find me on my website, which is my name, caratuttlebell.com. And then you can find me on various forms of social media at Kara Tuttle Bell. So I tried to make it easy. You reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, doesn't matter. I'm publicly available. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about this, as you can probably tell.
I can tell. I love it. And I can't wait to call my son and say, raise angry girls. That's what we're going to be about. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
And wasn't that a great program? Oh, love that episode. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Learn more about me on my website, drmoanderson.com. That's MOE. You can read book excerpts, watch videos, learn about my services that I offer, and book me for a speaking engagement. I'd love to talk with your group, and I'd love to work with you. So until the next time, review, renew, and re-you. Thank you.